This is a story of a missing Somali young lady.
Hey guys, welcome back to our channel. Today we'll be discussing a case that we've been following since 2018.
Yes, so it's about a Somali woman. Her name is yet to be known because it's a Jane Doe case, and her remains were found in April of 2011. And we just felt that it was important as a community to try and find who this person is, right?
So we'll be discussing this case with a cold case detective, and he will let us know what he knows so far.
My name is Pat Beall. I'm an investigator with the Lewis County Prosecutor's Office, and what I do is I investigate cold case homicides, and in this particular case, unidentified human remains.
So can you tell us your experiences with cold cases?
I've been in law enforcement for about 45 years. I spent 20 years in the military as a military police, and then 20 years as a civilian law enforcement. And I worked 12 years as a detective. And what I did is look violent crimes, homicides, and include that were cold cases. Myself, my partner, we've had several successes over the years. And then once I retired from my full-time job, I got hired from the prosecutor's office just to work cold cases. So in the last 3 years, that's what I've been doing. And right now I have 5 cases that I'm actually looking at. And kind of what we do is we go through and study cases, kind of like Monday morning quarterbacking the detectives from years and years ago. This case was in 2011. I have 2 in 1986, 85 and 86. And then this one's the more recent one's 2011, just because of circumstances. What we do is we take the case, we study it, we look to see if there's anything that can be done from our experience. And then the change in technology that's occurred in the last 15 years is tremendous. And then see if we can apply that new technology to cases. And we have done that in this particular case.
Can you tell us about what you know so far since 2011? Are there any new developments?
I'll give you just about everything we have. This is actually, I was kind of thinking about before I got on with you, how do we present this? And we present this is a story of a missing Somali young lady. And how this story came about is in April 2011, a logger up on Highway 12, which is just outside of Morton, stopped off to relieve himself. And when he did that up on a logging road, he saw skeletal remains. And he called the law enforcement. They came out and they processed the scene at the time. Now, what was really unusual about this circumstance, it wasn't buried. The skeletons were right on top of the ground. So, through the processing at the time, another thing about the skeleton was fully intact, which is really unusual. That means the ligaments and the cartilage and that stuff was intact. So the young lady was missing her feet and her hands from about the elbows down. So it's a full skeleton. And, that's unusual, sitting on top of the ground, not partially buried or something like that. So part of the process of processing the crime scene, they take soil samples from that area and they pick up everything that's there. And those soil samples were sent into a crime lab and they were evaluated, and the samples from the site did not match the soil that came out of the skeleton's mouth. So that means that the body was buried somewhere else, dug up and thrown out here. So that's a huge mystery just in itself. Now the skeletal remains were sent to the state crime pathologist or anthropologist, which is up out of Pierce County. This is the one, King County, which is the one that we use, and they evaluate and they tell us what they can at the time. Now you gotta understand, this is 2011 and things have changed a lot in the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. So they came back with the initial report that it was between 5'2", I believe, and it was 5'8", petite build. They believed it to be white with a possibility of a mixed, either Asian or Hispanic. And that's what we had at the time. And that's what the, the officers and detectives back in the day were, thought about it. Well, of course, everybody's, looking for a missing person in that category, and which leads to a lot of dead ends. So eventually, part of this process also is that the King County medical examiner, they take an extract of DNA, and that DNA gets placed in a system called CODIS, and that's a national crime, database for DNA. So if anyone finds someone, someone is missing and they get their DNA in the system, then it would come up with a computer hit, and we would maybe find that person. So nothing's happened like that. The DNA is in the database, but we haven't received any hits from that particular area. So that's kind of where it was about 2.5 years ago, when myself and my partner, we picked up the case and we started reading it. And there's some new technologies that have come across, and some of it you've seen on TV and some of your crime scene shows and things like that, is the genealogy portion of the DNA. So in our state crime labs don't do that. So we had to get the funding for this, and which was prosecutors all on board. We got to thank Jonathan Meyer and for coming up with the money, because this is relatively expensive, $5,000 per test. So the funding was acquired, and we sent the DNA to a place called Parabon Labs, and it's a lab back east. You can Google it and look up on it. They do a lot of really phenomenal stuff, and they take the DNA and they kind of like 23andMe. You guys have done that, or what are some of the other ones where you can submit your DNA? And they come back and they tell us a whole different story than what we had before. They came back, and on the flyer that you get, or that people might be able to see on this, at a later date, they'll get to see a map of East Africa, and said that our victim came from East Africa, and that means Somalia, possibly Ethiopia, Sudan, Southern Egypt, things like that. But the scientists, so it's a big area. But the scientists told us that in all likelihood, though, it's Somali. And apparently, and I've read a little bit on this since I've got this information, apparently in Somalia, there's 5 or 7 tribes. So from a DNA perspective, this DNA came within that tribal system. Historically, we're going back 1,000 years or something. I don't know what it's like now. So that's what the DNA does. Now, what they do then is they enter this DNA, and they take it and enter it into a database and use the algorithms and stuff, and they come up with a profile. And with that profile, they can tell the true eye color, complexion, whether freckles, true hair color, and several other things that they can tell from the DNA. Now that computer comes up with a profile, and that's what you see in the flyer that we've sent out and you've seen before. That's an artist and computer generated profile. So now we have something that, okay, now that we know we're looking for somebody, we know we're looking for somebody from the Somali community. And, in the United States, compared to the population of the United States, the Somali community is small. So I don't know the exact numbers, but it's maybe 100,000, maybe 1 million, I don't know. But out of 330 million, that's a small percentage. So what we did is, another thing that we did at that time, so we got that flyer, we got that out, we started publicizing that, we got it out to a lot of different agencies where we thought the Somali community was. That flyer got out in the Seattle area because we have a Somali community there. We got it out in the Portland area. We also hit Minneapolis, St. Paul, because that's a big Somali community back there. Another thing we did about the same time, and what the viewers and you folks need to understand is, anytime we send this stuff off the lab, it's not like on TV in a 60-minute script. It takes months before we get results back. So when we sent this stuff off to the Parabon lab, we also were looking for a source for the soil because we wanted to see if that soil could narrow down where she came from. We ended up sending it off to 2 different labs. One lab couldn't tell us anything. Another lab back in Chicago looked at it from a pollen perspective. So they go through the soil samples that were in her mouth, which is, you know, less than an ounce of soil, so not very much. And that lab came back and they gave us a particular tree that the pollen related to a particular tree. So that soil had pollen in it from a particular plant that's only found in southern British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, and Northern California, west of the mountains. So in the rainforest, the rain side of the mountains. So now I have a geographical area that we can start looking, you know, because that's where she was before we got her up in our area. So that was going on at the same time, you know, all those things are coming together. So we're kind of getting her story starting to be told.
Mm-hmm.
And we, Q13, Washington's Most Wanted, this is about a year ago, maybe a little more now, put out a segment on their show. And the prosecutor and initial detective that was out on the scene and, you know, talked about this and talked about we're reaching out to the Somali community to get out. Now that was broadcast in Seattle, has been broadcast, I think, several times. A lady from the Somali community that works as a liaison with Seattle Police Department also got that video, that segment, put on the Somali Voice of North America. So if you go on the Somali Voice of North America, the Facebook page, and you know, and people see that segment's on there. It's a, you know, kind of like a YouTube thing like we're doing here, but it's the show.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another place where that is at, trying to reach out to the Somali community. So we've had about 9 months ago, we thought it hit. A lady from Ohio, Somali lady from Ohio, thought that was a missing cousin. And we worked with that person. She and her cousin came into the country the same time in 1995 or 1997 from Somalia. They left Somalia, went to Kenya. Now you gotta understand, at the time, they're 13, 14 years old. So they went to in Kenya to, you know, a camp, and then they went through the process and they were brought to the United States. Well, the system is kind of messed up, and I worked with immigrations on this because I'm trying to find out information. So when I'm talking to the young lady in Ohio, well, she's, you know, probably 40 something now, because they came in 1995 or 97 and they were 13, 14 years old. So in working with her, she said, Detective Beall, I was talking with some of my Somali girlfriends on Facebook or whatever, and we were just talking about, I haven't seen my cousin. My cousin went missing 20 years ago, and we haven't seen her. And one of the other gals said, you need to look at this website, the Q13 video. And she says, Detective Beall, that picture is my cousin. Well, I'm getting kind of excited because, you know, hopefully we've identified this person. And she gives me a name. But one of the problems also when they immigrate back in the day, I said, can you give me the spelling of her name, birth dates, and things like that? She didn't know any of that. Well, she knew her name, but the spelling is different spelled in Somali and in English.
Mm-hmm.
She gave me what she thought both were. She knew what the Somali was. She gave me what she thought was on her paperwork. She didn't know her birth date because there weren't a lot of records and things like that in Somali back in that time. In that time, apparently, you didn't walk into the country with, you know, a passport or with a birth certificate.
Yeah.
Non-existent for these people, you know, when they're immigrating in. So immigration's department helped me out a lot because now, of course, I know who the cousin is and I can backtrack. They came on the same plane. So we worked some information on that. What was kind of unique about this, the missing, her cousin, the missing person who she thinks was missing at the time, brother lives in Seattle. So he also saw that and calls me and we talk and he gave me some DNA. So I took the DNA in, have it sent in this process, and it comes back. It's kind of interesting. You know, I get the report back and it says it's related, but not biological siblings. You know, what does that mean? So I got the scientists, I got to get on to them and talk because they have different ways of putting things. Well, it turns out that it's not a direct match. It's 6 generations down the road. So that's like, would you know who your 6th cousin is? No. Did do though, is it verified that she's Somali because they were linked. So our missing person is linked. Now, the good story on this, once I found out it's not them, doing immigrations, I end up finding the missing person in California and I linked the family up.
Oh, that's neat.
So that was bad for me, good for the family. But the good part of it, you know, in this case is it just confirmed that we're looking for a missing Somali girl, you know, at this time.
Yeah.
So, you know, we've done a lot of research and did a lot of searching all over the place. We have any missing person, the DNA's on file in Canada and British Columbia. I've coordinated with in Canada, the coroner's office handles missing persons, you know, if a missing person's DNA comes up. So if they have a missing person, anything, their DNA gets put on file and it would come up as a hit. So I've coordinated with British Columbia. Right now we're working to get it out to the Somali community with what you folks are doing here is very wonderful thing for us because it's reaching out is really difficult. I don't know if it's it's a cultural thing. They don't want to know, or not accepting it. I'm not really sure. It hasn't been easy to get these links and get it out to the communities. So that's kind of where we're standing right now. And I have just recently, after the first year, I took and broadcast that flyer again up and down the West Coast. And there's an agency in the state through the AG's office. It's called the HITS organization. It's a homicide information stuff. And they have links to data that can get it all over the United States to law enforcement agencies. So after the first of the year, I said, look, I got to do this again. So I put another request for information and trying to hook up with Somali communities and any other missing people. And I got 2 possible things: missing persons that haven't been found. So I'm working those 2 angles on 2 different people. And one is a gal who's missing out of Puyallup, who's actually reported missing out of Portland, that was actually from Saudi Arabia. But that's close enough, and who knows the genetics that go, back and forth. You're not very far. It's a very possibility. So we're looking at that. Anytime we get any information, we track it till we can't track it anymore. So you kind of have what I have, on the whole investigation. I mean, there's nothing secret here trying to hold back because we don't even know who she is.
That's true.
If we can ever identify her, then then we'll look at the crime aspect of it, because we know that, she didn't die in Lewis County, she died somewhere else.
Do you have any leads or inklings about what happened with Jane Doe? Was it ruled as a homicide or a suicide?
It's not ruled, it's ruled as an unidentified human remains right now. And, to be found like that, in all likelihood, is probably a homicide. But when the anthropologists and the pathologists look at the bones and things like that, they're not finding like the head wasn't shot, her head wasn't caved in, anything like that. So we don't know. Once we if we ever can identify her and find out where she came from, then we can look at her lifestyle, who's she living with, what she's going on, and people are going to have to answer some questions.
Mhm.
So
So-
right now she's listed as missing,
Person.
unidentified human remains.
As a Somali community, we're very tight knit, regardless of where we live. If we live in Minnesota, Seattle, London, and it's really interesting that this hasn't been solved or no one has claimed her body, and that's what really intrigued us about it. So we were going to ask you, what do you think we should look out for as a community?
In this particular case, and this is one of our problems of trying to find out. So I have this skeletal remains, and I can't find anybody that, no one's willing, and I'm talking about scientists and anthropologists and stuff like that, are willing to say, oh, she was in the ground for 2 years, or she's in the ground for 3 years. So we know we found her in 2011. How far back was she in the ground? We really don't know. Now, from my experience, I've seen bones, in ground and, things like that. And I'd say she's probably, in the ground for several years. So now we're looking at, I'm just saying, okay, let's go back from 2011, go back about 5 years, just to be on the safe side, and say, okay, let's start looking at 2005, 2006 forward. So when people see it they're looking at 2011, they're going, no, I don't know anybody missing since 2011, because it could be way before that. Now, years wise. So, it's that type of thing that we're working with. I mean, that's something that, when you talk to people in the Somali community, don't think of 2011. You got to think before 2011, someone missed a long time ago. And, who knows?
That's true. That's very true.
So if you want to help us, we'll be leaving other information down in the description box below. You can let us know if you have any leads for her.
Yes, and we'll be putting the poster down below. So if there's anyone that fits this profile that was in your life that just, went missing out of nowhere, or you lost contact with, and it might be Lewis County Jane Doe, make sure to contact Detective Beall.
Thank you.